Warning: this video discusses very gruesome ways to go out. This is not for the faint of heart. I've become increasingly fascinated with ancient torture methods and learning about them. As a result, I decided I'd like to rank all the ones I found. Let's start with the best and work our way to the worst of the worst. Just to be clear, I think almost all of these are inhumane, and I wouldn't want anyone to experience these. So just because it's at the bottom of the list doesn't mean it's not brutal. If the method is in blue, that means it's primarily meant for psychological torture. If it's in red, it's for physical pain, and purple is a fairly even balance of both. We have nearly 70 entries to go through. Let's get into it. I already went over color schemes, but I will also go over the historical events right now. So I will include the earliest and latest known uses of this method and where as well. At 67, we have solitary confinement. This is a life imprisonment method, and I like being alone, so I initially wouldn't mind. I may go crazy, but I'm already crazy, so it's probably fine. This is a relatively recent punishment starting in 1700s Philly, but it is now used throughout the world. At 66, we have the ducking stool. Just a simple chair meant for public humiliation. At least that's how it started in 1300s Europe. Women could get this punishment from prostitution or just simply having a baby from the wrong man. By attaching it to a wooden plank, you could make it look like a seesaw and make them fall out of their chair. Even worse, this was often done near water to women accused of being witches. They could also go for a nice little ride if wheels are attached to the chair. It slowly died off in the 1700s and was gone by 1817 when England used it last. 65. The drunkard's cloak. This was used in 1500s England when drinking became illegal. So to punish drunks, they cut holes in a barrel for a person's head and arms and forced them to walk around the street while being insulted by the people passing by. This also happened to women who were accused of being prostitutes. This seemed to have been last used in 1800s America. Chinese water torture. Apparently, this didn't come from China. It came from Italy between the 15 and 1600s. Designed to induce mental trauma, it's done by inconsistently dripping water on a person's head for long periods of time. The person was often stripped naked and humiliated in public as everyone watched them go crazy. Our society has come a long way since it was socially acceptable to laugh at mental distress in public. Now, for a while, we didn't know if it was effective or not, so Mythbusters tested it, but they found that the restraining devices caused most of the mental distress compared to the water droplets. Next up is waterboarding. Putting a cloth over someone's head, then pouring water on it to make it look and feel like they're drowning, as a gag reflex is triggered. Sometimes torturers would start at the stomach, then pour it up into the mouth. If your torturer isn't experienced and does it too quickly, you'll die of a lack of oxygen. It could have been used earlier, but we know it happened during the Spanish Inquisition. It was used a lot of places around the world, but stopped being used for torture around apartheid. However, the US military still used it as a training exercise until 2007. Blowing from a cannon, getting tied to a cannon and then firing it. The Portuguese started using it in the 1500s until around the 1800s, with an execution happening in 1930. Sometimes this can backfire and the shots can go into the crowd. One unfortunate person even fell from the rope right as the cannon fired and didn't die instantly. This method was also used in another despicable way: religious torture. It was used a lot when Britain was taking control of India. Now, India was and still is primarily Hindu and Muslim, and if you blow a person's head off, that's going to mess up the funeral plans. So, everyone in the crowd got a big middle finger from the British because their religious practices were messed up. Lethal injection. Considered to be the most humane way to kill someone, at least in America, this was proposed in the late 1800s but took 100 years for people to realize this was better than hanging. However, these can still be botched. If you don't put the needle in the right spot, there's a lot of pain. You have to have the perfect concentration of the drug to make this work properly, and you need someone qualified. Reports have gone around about people who aren't very good being assigned to do this. First of all, IVs are typically used, which is enough for me to fight against this method. Everyone has a slightly different sized arm, which makes it hard for doctors to find the right spot. Not to mention, I'm a shaky person. If you pierce the wrong spot with the IV needle, an inhumane amount of pain is administered before you go unconscious. This happened to me when I had my wisdom teeth removed. I was told the IV wasn't supposed to hurt, but it actually hurt a lot. It could have been my fault, but this is too short of a story to get its own video, so I thought I'd just tell it here. Falling. You can do this to yourself, but we'll focus on other people doing it to you as punishment. This can be painful if death isn't instant or if it doesn't happen at all. Because it's so common, it doesn't really matter where and when it started and ended. Sensory overload. This was used as an interrogation technique, but using what I presume to be loud sounds of music. It is also used to cause sleep deprivation. Nearly exclusively a psychological method, it brings one of my deepest fears into reality. What if there was music so loud it could make everyone in a single room deaf at once? Apparently, this was used to get people to talk. I really don't get it. Yubitsume can be used either as punishment or an extreme apology. Parts of a person's finger are cut off until the other person is satisfied. This is definitely painful, but not as bad as the others. You can imagine this isn't deadly, although, as you'll see, sometimes the deadly ones are more merciful, in my opinion. I don't know if this says something about the methods themselves or me as a person. Anyway, this was commonly practiced in Japan starting in the 1600s. It's still around, but a lot less common. One of the earliest torture methods here we have cropping, a punishment where your ears are cut off. It's simple but effective. While you have 10 fingers, you only have 2 ears, so I feel like this is a bit worse. It's been around a while, showing up in Hammurabi's Code and Assyrian law, and ended around 1800s America. At 56, we have hand removal, pretty self explanatory. A pretty famous example used frequently during the French Revolution is the guillotine. This involves a sharp blade cutting a fastened person's head off. With the pull of the rope, the blade would swiftly fall. In theory, like the lethal injection and the cannon blowing, this can be botched. But instead of restraining equipment being faulty, usually it's the blade that's faulty. If it's not sharp enough, a lot of pain is felt, and it may take a few tries for the head to be cut off. Something similar to it was invented in Ireland in the 12 or 1300s. France was actually the last country to use this in 1977, 120 years after Belgium stopped using it. Burying alive. The time of death can depend on how much air is in the enclosed area. Qin Shi Huang, I hope I'm saying this right, the first emperor of a unified China, ordered Confucian followers to be buried alive around 200 BCE. At the Battle of Changping, some 200,000 soldiers were captured and buried alive. Because this can happen by accident, deaths can still occur from this one. Poinaculli, an execution method where you throw someone who killed one of their parents into a sack along with a dog, snake, monkey, and chicken. I forget what the significance of those animals are. To aggravate the animals and make sure the criminal was dead, the sack was thrown into water. This one isn't good, but it doesn't sound bad relatively since drowning doesn't take super long. It started and nearly ended in ancient Rome, but medieval Germans revived it until it died out around 1750. Birching. Hitting a person's behind with a birch rod, used as a school punishment in the mid 1800s, back when straight up abuse was acceptable. It seemed to have started in 1793 during the French Revolution. This is actually still used today exclusively as a male punishment in Trinidad and Tobago. Hanging. Another common and old execution method. This started around 2,500 years ago in ancient Persia. It's been abolished in a lot of countries and is nowadays usually done to oneself. At least cropping and yubitsumi are quick. Tickle torture is not. Some of you may be surprised you can torture somebody by tickling. Have you ever been tickled on the feet or somewhere else where you're really ticklish and you tell the person to stop, but they continue for maybe another 10 seconds, then stop? Well, these torturers don't like to stop, especially when it's little kids. And let me tell you, this is a lot worse than your dog licking your feet. A person is restrained and not usually able to move a lot. Laughing, in this case, would symbolize panic. It could be used for confessions or torture in general. The worst came when they wet a person's toes and brought a goat in to dry it. But because goats have such rough tongues, sometimes skin could come off if this was done long enough. It was started around ancient times in Japan because of the length of the punishment. That's why it's up here. Castor oil barrels. Executioners realized castor oil makes people poop, so they made people drink a lot of it, then put them in a barrel. They would either drown or be let out once they confessed whatever information the authorities were looking to hear. I even heard this was used not too long ago during Mussolini's rule in Italy. Immurement. When a person is usually enclosed in a super confined space, like inside a wall, and then left there to starve. You could also house people for life by giving them food. You can't spend your days doing anything because of the lack of space, so there's a lot of psychological torture as well. Hamstringing. Breaking the hamstring bones, sometimes with a sword or a rod, so that a person can't walk. Starting around the 4th to 6th century Rome with people, it was actually referenced in the Bible in Joshua as being done to horses, so they can't be used for war. It was also used on slaves in the late 1600s in France, and that seems to be the last time from what I'm seeing. 46 is Roman decimation. You're not guaranteed to even be hurt here. Let me explain. This process was done when a large group of soldiers were divided into smaller groups. Then everyone drew straws. Whoever had the shortest would then be killed by the other members of the group, either by getting stoned, stabbed, or beaten with a club. The groups were often 10, where one would die and 9 would contribute to killing. Blinding. In 1014, Byzantine Emperor Basil II ordered 15,000 soldiers to be blinded after being divided into groups of 100. Their eyes were reportedly cut out. One soldier out of the 100 was only blinded in one eye so he could lead the rest. Apparently, the Bulgarian Tsar got a heart attack from the sight of all the blindings after everyone returned. And I can't even go to the eye doctor without panicking from a puff of air. I can't imagine getting my eyes cut out. This seems to be the only mention of an event like this happening, but not with, not with blinding in general. Like the weekend, some people in the past were blinded by the lights. Aztecs live heart removal. Really, the only bad thing here is getting your chest cut open and your heart removed. You'd die after this, but there'd still be plenty of pain before that. Branding. Usually done to animals to mark them and keep track of them. This was actually done to prisoners at times for, disturbingly, the same purpose, in addition to humiliation. It consisted of burning a symbol or letter onto somebody's skin. Like cropping, this was part of the Black Code in America. It was last used in Russia in the 1960s. However, this supposedly still goes on in Sudan. It started around the 300s under Constantine, used as punishment for crimes for not joining the Catholic Church. Flogging or flagellation. This is what comes to mind for most people when they hear whipping. You'll often hear about this done on the back, and it can definitely cause scars, but you'll ideally be able to live your life as normal once the pain goes away. It does sound like it'll hurt a lot, obviously, depending on the amount of times you're whipped. 41. Crushed by an elephant. Pretty self explanatory. Not sure how you'd train an elephant to do that, but whatever. For minimum pain, you want your head crushed first, but ancient torturers weren't always that nice. Sometimes you get your arms and legs crushed before the fatal blow is dealt to the head or chest. This was primarily done in India and southern Asia in general. This was rarely used anywhere else, but it started all the way back around the Common Era. By the early 1900s, this practice was over with. 40. Rat torture. If you put fire near a rat, you can force it to burrow into a person in order to escape. They would then pop out the other side. This has probably been my most long lasting fear, since I remember reading a book in the summer of 2017 about the worst deaths ever. I'm not sure if I still have the book. Usually this happens with a person's stomach. It's even worse when multiple rats get in on the action. Unfortunately, I don't know anyone who's come across just one rat. It's usually more than that. This was originally used during Elizabethan England. The scariest part is it's not completely gone. There was a huge threat of it after a kidnapping in 2010. So anyway, rats are cute at times, but they can also be your doom. Pillory. Meant to cut off circulation in the hands, this one is also a form of public shaming. This kind of torture is meant to warn others about what will happen if they break the law. Last used in the US in 1905, it's supposedly still used around the world. Nobody knows who invented it, but it was used in medieval Europe as a prisoner punishment. However, it could have been used as early as ancient Greece. In the worst cases, someone could be whipped or stoned while in here too. The gas chamber. Another method used in the United States, but also used during the Holocaust. Developed at the start of the 19th century, this includes a numerous amount of poisonous gases that have been used to poison people. This still goes on, even in the US, but we've found a lot better ways to do it. The reason it's over here is because these have been botched and people have stayed conscious for 15 minutes. That doesn't sound bad, but your lungs are probably burning that whole time. Thumb screw, a small device used to crush your thumb or get you to confess something. Variations were constructed to work with all your fingers and even toes. Originating in early modern Europe, sometimes the edges were even sharp to pierce nails. This was also used to torture slaves on ships, and it sounds painful. While they're still used, they're mainly used as tools, not torture methods. The last time that happened was around the 1700s, from what I could find. Witch's bridle, a muzzle looking thing that goes around the head, usually meant for women accused of literally any bad behavior. Starting around 1500 Scotland, a spike was usually toward the middle of it to pierce a person's tongue. It was done away with around the end of the 1800s. Tongue terror. Exactly as it sounds, this was what happened when other people said literally anything that the upper class didn't like. Starting in medieval Europe, but declining during and after the Enlightenment, this plier looking tool was meant to stop a person from speaking by cutting their tongue out. If this didn't do the trick, they'd just use a knife. Unfortunately, tongue removal is very effective at hiding any shady activity. I mean, have you seen Speak No Evil? I'll never forget hearing eerie music in the background while they were doing the Cotton Eye Joe in the 2024 trailer. Cold cell torture, an interrogation technique that doubles as a torture method. It can go from just leaving the air conditioning on full blast to life threatening temperatures. The CIA used to do it a lot, and it sounds cruel, especially for someone super sensitive to cold temperatures like me. It's a lot harder to detect, which is why Britain did it too. When you're stripped naked, it's even worse. Mazzatello. Sorry, that's my best Italian accent. It's horrible. Anyway, this is infinite head trauma. This started around 1490 and ended around 1806. This is done by beating someone on the head with a baton or club. Simple but painful. Combing. When you take a comb designed to comb sheep and apply it to a human, bad things happen. Skin can come off with it, and torturers take advantage of this. The first happened around 5 to 600 BC and ended around 300 CE, from what I could find. Scalping. When the executioner cuts into the person's head and essentially cuts off their scalp, hair, and all. Infections were pretty common and killed the person through an otherwise not deadly torture method. Literal pins and needles. The familiar feeling of numbness returns, except this time you're literally being pierced by multiple pins and needles. Because this is such a general method that can be combined with plenty of the other ones, historical data is tough to find. Castration. When a man's private parts are cut off, if used as a torture method, the person will definitely still be conscious. This is not good because you're cutting off the most sensitive part of the male body. We don't know when this originated as a torture method, but we do know that it was used by Russians against Ukrainians. The side effects of this are actually good for me anyway, as they make you more feminine. But the sheer pain is why I suggest that all of you trans ladies make sure you're unconscious before this is done. The electric chair. A typical American punishment until 2008, and by typical I mean however often the death penalty is enforced, used to be more common, but now they do lethal injections. This can be botched in horrible ways, including catching fire and bleeding to death. It's meant to instantly stop your heart, but it doesn't seem to do that. This started in the 1880s and, like I said, was mainly used in the United States. Hanged, drawn, and quartered. This is where a person almost hangs to death and is done alongside that, and their body is cut open. It's really bad because your body has to deal with the near suffocation in your neck. Then a person was beheaded in order to make sure they weren't around anymore. Then they'd cut up their body parts and hang them in famous places to scare people. By they I mean early modern British and Irish executioners. I watched a lot of videos and read a lot of articles while researching this, and one of these videos was by the Paint Explorer. Only the second method in the video was bastinado. I'm not sure if he ranked them or went in no particular order, but in my opinion, this is one of the worst punishments you can inflict on a single body part. This is exactly like flogging, except done on the feet. A lot more painful than normal flogging and won't always break bones. You may not be able to walk again, but you'll probably think of the experience more for the psychological trauma and intense pain. I mean, if just stubbing a toe can hurt, imagine getting beaten repeatedly on just the feet. I don't think anybody deserves that. We know from writing that it's as old as 960 in China. This is another method that's unfortunately still around, but most countries, including the US, didn't ban it until the middle of the 1900s. However, it was used during the Saddam Hussein era in Iran and stopped only 20 years ago. I actually found a Quora thread that asked, "What does bastinado feel like?" I'll link it down below. The top response goes into their experiences with this form of torture in school and by their parents. Pitch capping. Pouring hot tar into a paper cone and then onto a person's head. With how sticky tar is, good luck getting it off. It's also so hot it can burn the skin on your head off, and it's actually meant to do that. But it isn't ripped off until it's cool. And since it was done in public, the whole town got to see it. This was most famously used during the 1798 Irish Rebellion. It was first practiced in ancient Greece and Rome, but luckily isn't practiced today. Tarring and feathering. Imagine tar is applied to your whole body now, then feathers are stuck to it. Now you look like a chicken in public while being left to burn. I hate the idea of it. This punishment was super common during the Revolutionary War. It started in 1189 in England and was used around the 1900s. Since then, only a few cases have occurred by some extremist groups. The latest was in 2020. Brazen bowl. More burning here. This time you're placed in a metal, bowl-shaped device where the bottom of it is heated up with either a candle or maybe lighting a campfire under it. I don't know. I didn't really check. The person inside would still be able to breathe through the holes at the top, but their screams would sound like a bowl. This started in ancient Greece if it was used, but we cannot confirm that. This was also used to persecute early Christians before fading away before the year 300. Keel hauling. It feels weird placing it this low on the list. Again, this is just personal preference, but in my opinion, the rest of these are just as bad or worse. You're tied to a rope around a ship, then dragged underwater around the ship. Lots of things can happen down there. Either a person could drown, which is probably the best outcome, get severe damage from whatever sharp parts of the ship are down there, or simply bump their head really badly on the bottom of the ship. If they weren't dead by then, the crewmates would just do it again. This required a surprising amount of effort from the rest of the ship's mates to pull the rope. This could be older, but we know it was used around 700 in the Byzantine Empire. Every time is different if you're a professional executioner. You never know which body parts will be hit and how severe it will be. Strappado. This also sounds Italian, but I don't know if it is. Hanging someone by the hands until their shoulders dislocate. Death comes in about an hour. Thought to have originated around medieval times, of course. This method was also known as reverse hanging. This was used as recently as the Vietnam War and is definitely not something I want done to anyone. Pouring lead or a hot liquid in general will get the job done with this salt shaker shape thing. This was sometimes just dumped onto a person, though, around the eyes. Talk about a blinding sight. This started in Middle Assyria when it was decreed that by being a prostitute, a woman was to have hot pitch poured over her. It's been banned around the world since the 20th century. You can see why. Choke pear. A really disgusting one, a device shaped like a pear that can extend suddenly, usually while in a person's mouth, though it can sometimes be in their butt. Once inserted, the pear will extend until too much damage has been done. This goes toward the middle of the list because it's super painful in one area, but there's no pain in the rest of the body. Supposedly it was used in the medieval period, but we aren't sure if it actually was. By that I mean it's hard to determine this was used for what we think it was. Could have been just a fruit juice extractor, like some believe. It looks like the pear was used in the early modern era around 1600. Even if this did exist at some point and matched the details from historical records, it still died out before 1900. Heretic's Fork, a device that puts chills in me just looking at it. It's strapped around your neck and pierces your lower chin in addition to your upper chest. You're basically forced to keep your head up as long as you can, otherwise, the unimaginable will become imaginable and happen. This was one of the torture methods used during the Spanish Inquisition. I literally feel heat inside my body just thinking about Spaniards killing pagans for not being Christian with this device that looks like one of the most painful things ever. Oh my gosh. The rack. A person lies down on their back and onto what looks like a table and has their arms and legs stretched in different directions until they tear off. Then they'll die of blood loss. A person may not necessarily be killed, usually if they confess to something. It's hard to find where this started, but we know it was around in ancient Greece. It was used a lot in Britain, but died out in Russia in the 1700s. Catherine's wheel. You're placed onto a wheel, then hit with a hammer multiple times on the limbs. Once they're all broken, you're hung up top and left to starve. There are lots of variations to this, such as getting your feet crushed with the wheel first. This is before you're nailed to it. You might not be, though. Sometimes you can get decapitated or thrown into fire. No matter which method is used, they all sound excruciating. This became a famous execution method due to the death of Saint Catherine of Alexandria, a martyr. It started becoming illegal around the early 1800s and was last used in Prussia in 1841. Crucifixion. For those of you who never grew up with Christianity, this used to be a common practice where a person was nailed to a cross. It happened to Jesus in the year 33 and was made holy later on. It basically impales both your arms and your private parts. But these aren't essential body parts, meaning you won't die quickly. This slow death is what makes some people skeptical of how quickly Jesus supposedly died on the cross, but I won't get into that here. This was first used by the Persians and is still around today, being legal in both Saudi Arabia and Iran. Seppuku. I hope I'm saying it right. This is cutting your stomach open, removing your bowels, and bleeding out. A tradition done by Japanese samurai who were about to be tortured or killed in battle. They felt it was more honorable to take things into their own hands. This made a comeback in World War II after starting in 1177 and was the last time this was used in its entirety. Castration. This takes the spot as the most painful thing you can do to a single body part. This makes me feel bad for men. When a glass rod is put into their eggplant, then crushed with a hammer, oh, I can't imagine. Sounds like one of the most painful things you can do to it. You have to deal with the sensitivity of that area and pieces of glass all around piercing the skin. If being kicked in that area hurts badly enough, I can't imagine what glass piercing through it is like. Acid execution. Compared to boiling alive, this is not quite as bad because at least the acid will give you a quicker death as opposed to water slowly heating up. Boiling alive. I can't imagine being tied to a rope, being lowered into a big pot, only for the water to slowly heat up to boiling temperature until all my organs melt. Like, who thought this was a good idea to do this to anyone, even if they're criminals? This was rare, only really used in parts of Eurasia, since drowning was a lot more common. If you were convicted of high treason in England from 1531 to 1547, this would be your death. However, the earliest instance was in Scotland in 1222. The latest was when Islam Karimov, again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing these, former president of Uzbekistan, supposedly used this against people he thought were terrorists. But there have also been reports of people from ISIS doing it as well as Mexican cartels. Bamboo. It grows quickly, so if it gets inserted into your butt, you're done for. This reminds me of the watermelon seed hoax, except it's actually true, as tested on Mythbusters. Allegedly, this was used during World War II on the Allies, but only started around the 1800s. You'll probably die before it reaches the other side, but you get to experience it going through the insides of your body for days before it even happens. Spanish donkey. Normally a slow process, this was sped up by attaching weights on people's feet. It was meant to look like a horse or a donkey, and the area where you ride it was wooden, thin, and sharp. If they survived, they probably wouldn't be able to walk again. Starting during the Spanish Inquisition and moving to the rest of Europe in the 1600s, it's hard to describe what the experience is like because there's not a lot quite like it here in modern day America. Speaking of America, this device was used both during the Revolutionary and Civil Wars. It's not used today as it's considered too inhumane now, but apparently not at the time. The Judas chair. Imagine the Spanish donkey, but the impalement comes much quicker. Well, I guess it depends if you're lowered there or not, how fast too. Maybe the pain doesn't last as long, but it definitely feels worse in my opinion. There's a chair with a sharp tip where you're meant to sit, and your body is pierced from the outside in. Fittingly, this was meant as punishment for betrayal and treason, and was created around the New Testament time period. This could be slowed by being pulled down by ropes, and was also made of rusty metal, so you could get tetanus or something else, I don't know, assuming you even survive, but you probably won't. Blood eagle. Oh, thought to have originated from the Vikings. A restrained victim would do something similar to an Aztec heart removal, but worse. They would cut you open, tear your rib cage to resemble eagle's wings, then remove your lungs. It takes about as long as the heart removal, but it's so much more painful. Scaphism. It's cracked the top of people's lists, but it's all the way up on here on mine because of the pain, though that does get, not because of the pain, but even though that does get bad, but because of the sheer length of this process. You're fed milk and honey, which makes you attractive to nasty bugs or anything that likes the combination of milk, honey, and poop. First mentioned in the ancient Greek time period, one man allegedly survived 17 days, which was enough to give it the top spot on other people's lists. We still have a few left to go. The sharp pendulum, meant to cut you really badly. It was basically a pendulum shaped device that alternated until you bled out or something vital was damaged in your torso. Allegedly, this started at the end of the Spanish Inquisition and ended around the mid 1800s. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a book called The Pit and the Pendulum, which later inspired the Mario 64 level of the same name. Knowing that is a lot more terrifying considering how much I used to play that game, but at least pendulums can't pierce him in the game. Next up, we have sawing in half. Did you know that when you're upside down, you stay conscious longer? Well, executioners exploited this when sawing people in half. Starting in the most sensitive area, they eventually worked their way up, or, well, I guess down. Depending on the sharpness of the blade, this could be a slow process, and there's plenty of pain to go along with it. Iron Maiden. Most people believe this was from the medieval times, but it doesn't look like it was. It didn't appear in writing until the 1800s, and we don't even know if they were ever used. If they were, they'd be one of the worst things imaginable. An Iron Maiden is a cabinet filled with spikes on the inside. To maximize pain, the spikes were short and placed where non essential organs would be pierced. This way, the person doesn't die. Some people believe this was just created by museums to fascinate tourists and, of course, make more money because they always try to do that. Lynchie. Number 3 now. From 900 to 1900, the worst criminals in China would experience what is known as death by a thousand cuts. They would often be in a public setting, and the executioner would intentionally inflict small wounds with little to no bleeding. This was worse than death, as it came slowly, while the pain was immense. This was reserved for people who killed their parents, boss, or just a lot of people, or for high treason and crimes against the country. Traditional impalement. While we've addressed specific forms of this, like the Judas chair and bamboo torture, let's zoom out a bit. If a woman killed her husband for another man, she was to be impaled. This eventually changed to just adultery getting this punishment. This was all the way back in 1772 BCE. I'm surprised we know all this stuff from 37 years ago. 3,700 years ago, sorry. The most famous case was with Vlad the Impaler, obviously, who got rid of around 20,000 people in a forest of bodies. But let's get into how that's done. Usually, a person is placed onto a sharp metal pole through their butt first, then pulled downward. This would pierce vital organs, but there's an even worse variation. The sharp pole would have boards on either side where a person could stand. Their behind would be pierced, but them standing up kept anything vital from being damaged. When their legs got tired, they'd sink down, but then frantically stand back up, just like me when I slowly go into a pool. Except this is a deadly scenario. It terrifies me to no end because it's so much slower than the Judas chair, and it's why it's all the way up here. Imagine the pain of impalement, but all over your body. This is what flaying live is like. Meant to torture but hard to survive. You're essentially skinned alive. I didn't mean for that to rhyme. And the executioner can go as fast or slow as they want. You can get a hot liquid poured on your skin, or chunks of it can be manually removed. You won't die instantly, but you will either die of shock or infections from insect bites. Emerging around 800 years before Common Era, this process can also start in any part of the body. At least with many of these methods, you know the details of your fate. Here, you know the method, but not how your death starts and ends. The last instance of this seemed to be in 1957 in America. So that's going to be it. I'm hoping that you enjoyed 45 minutes of brutal torture methods. I'll see you in the next video.